What if the very survival of an entire civilization depended on a narrow strip of land and a few thousand brave men willing to make the ultimate sacrifice? In 480 BCE, at a mountain pass famously known as Thermopylae, one of the most formidable empires the ancient world had ever witnessed clashed with a coalition of fiercely independent Greek city-states. Outnumbered, encircled, and facing what appeared to be certain defeat, the events that transpired there would reverberate for over 2 millennia. This narrative transcends the legendary tale of just 300 Spartans. It is a complex story woven with threads of chilling prophecy, intense political tension, brilliant strategic foresight, insidious betrayal, destructive fire, and a profound sacrifice that irrevocably altered the course of history. But before we embark on this epic journey, please take a moment to subscribe to the Past Chronicle. After that, we'd love for you to leave a comment below, telling us which other compelling historical topics you're eager to explore. Now, steady your shield and let us journey to the very end of this extraordinary saga. What kind of ruler, consumed by such boundless rage, would dare to command the sea itself to be whipped? Before a single spear was hurled at Thermopylae, before 300 warriors ascended to legendary status, there stood a king at the precipice of the known world, his fury so potent it dared to challenge the very ocean. The Persian Empire was the largest political entity the ancient world had ever seen. It was a colossal realm, stretching from the sun-drenched shores of Asia Minor, across the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, through the ancient land of Egypt, and deep into the mystical fringes of India. Dozens of diverse cultures, languages, and peoples lived under its vast authority. Its meticulously maintained roads connected continents, rivers of gold flowed in tribute, and armies could be summoned from lands so distant that their inhabitants barely knew each other's names. And yet, one small cluster of rebellious city-states in Greece had audaciously dared to defy it. Years prior, King Darius I had dispatched his formidable forces across the Aegean Sea to exact retribution upon Athens and Eretria for their support of a revolt in Ionia. What followed was intended to be an unequivocal demonstration of imperial dominance. Instead, on the plains of Marathon, heavily armored Greek hoplites delivered a stunning blow, shocking the world by defeating a Persian expeditionary force. This was no mere military setback. It was a profound humiliation. Darius died before he could avenge this insult, but empires do not forget, and neither do kings. His son, Xerxes I, inherited not only a throne but also a deeply personal, unfinished war. Unlike his father, Xerxes would not send a limited expedition. He would unleash an unprecedented spectacle of power. He would mobilize the full, terrifying weight of his empire. For years, preparations unfolded on a scale almost unimaginable. Soldiers were summoned from every corner of the empire. Persians, Medes, Egyptians, Babylonians, Phoenicians, and Indians, forming a kaleidoscope of nations under one banner. Engineers meticulously carved canals through solid rock, and supply lines were calculated with obsessive, almost fanatical precision. And then came the monumental crossing. To invade Greece by land, Xerxes needed to transport his vast army from Asia into Europe. At the Hellespont, a narrow strait separating the two continents, his engineers constructed a breathtaking feat of engineering. A floating bridge of ships lashed together with thick cables and sturdy planks. It was a bold symbol, designed to proclaim that even the sea would yield to Persian ambition. But nature refused. A violent storm tore the bridge apart. For Xerxes, this was not simply bad weather. It was a direct affront, an act of defiance. Ancient sources recount that he commanded the waters to be whipped and branded, with chains cast into the sea as punishment. Whether literal or purely symbolic, the message was unmistakable. Even nature itself would be disciplined under his iron will. The bridge was rebuilt and the army crossed. As they advanced, ancient writers claimed that rivers ran dry beneath the sheer weight of men and animals. The very ground trembled. The earth itself seemed to groan, announcing that something unstoppable was moving west. Meanwhile, in Greece, the reaction was a far cry from a united front. Some city-states submitted immediately, offering earth and water, the traditional symbols of surrender. Others hesitated, carefully calculating their chances of survival. The Persian army was no longer a distant rumor. It was a horizon-darkening reality. But in Sparta and Athens, something profoundly different stirred. For them, this was no longer about mere territory. It was about the fundamental choice between absolute submission or unyielding defiance. And the Greeks would soon discover that their greatest enemy was not Persia's overwhelming size, but their own deep-seated divisions. How do lifelong rivals stand shoulder to shoulder when they barely trust each other? Long before Xerxes's army darkened the northern horizon, the Greek world was already profoundly fractured. The land was not a unified nation, but a vibrant mosaic of fiercely independent city-states, each with its own distinct laws, customs, ambitions, and entrenched grudges. Athens, the cradle of democracy and intellectual pursuit, prized debate, commerce, and innovation. Sparta, a warrior society forged in the crucible of unwavering discipline, valued austerity, and military supremacy above all else. Corinth zealously guarded its vital trade routes, while Thebes pursued its own complex ambitions. Unity was a rare commodity, suspicion a common one, and now survival demanded unprecedented cooperation. When Persian envoys arrived, demanding earth and water, the symbolic submission to the great king, some Greek cities complied. They reasoned that resistance was futile. Persia was simply too vast, too organized, too powerful. Submission, they believed, meant survival. But in Athens and Sparta, the answer was strikingly different. In Sparta, tradition tells us that the Persian messengers were unceremoniously thrown into a well and mockingly told to retrieve their own earth and water. Whether literal or not, the symbolism was unmistakable. Submission was not, and would never be, an option. In Athens, however, resistance required more than mere defiance. It demanded astute foresight. Years before Xerxes's invasion, a visionary statesman named Themistocles had persuaded Athens to invest its newfound silver wealth not in grand public monuments or land armies, but in ships. Hundreds of triremes, sleek warships propelled by 3 tiers of oarsmen, were constructed. Many Athenians questioned the decision at the time. Why prioritize naval power when Persia was predominantly a land empire? Themistocles, with a strategic brilliance others lacked, saw what they did not. Greece's rugged coastline was not a weakness, but a formidable weapon. Meanwhile, Sparta hesitated, not from fear, but from a profound religious impediment. When news arrived that Xerxes's invasion was imminent, Sparta was in the midst of the Carnia, a sacred religious festival during which military campaigns were traditionally forbidden. Religious law bound the city. Mobilizing the full Spartan army immediately would violate divine order. As if that tension were not enough, another voice entered the crisis. The Oracle of Delphi. The cryptic pronouncement delivered was chilling. Either Sparta would be utterly destroyed, or one of its kings must die. This was not strategy. This was a matter of cosmic decree, a terrible fate. With the Persian army advancing southward, Greek representatives gathered in Corinth to form what would become the Hellenic League, a defensive alliance of city-states willing to resist. It was fragile, rife with lingering mistrust. Some questioned whether Sparta sought dominance rather than genuine unity. Others doubted Athens' true motives. But time was rapidly running out. The Persian army had already crossed into Europe. The very ground trembled beneath thousands upon thousands of soldiers. Supply lines stretched across continents. The formidable Persian fleet moved along the coastline in parallel formation. Greece possessed 2 crucial advantages: terrain and timing. If the Persian army could be delayed on land while the Greek fleet maneuvered at sea, the crushing numerical imbalance might be neutralized. A narrow battlefield would be essential, somewhere that stripped numbers of their power. The answer lay in a mountain pass known as Thermopylae, the Hot Gates. But sending the full Spartan army was impossible due to the ongoing festival. So a delicate compromise emerged. A king would march, and his mission would not be victory in the conventional sense. It would be delay, and perhaps an immortal destiny. Remove or rephrase as part of the narrative, e.g., the stage was now set for an immortal destiny. What does a king choose when prophecy leaves him only 2 stark, dreadful outcomes: the fall of his beloved city or his own inevitable death. Leonidas was not the most famous Spartan before Thermopylae. He was not the most politically influential, nor the wealthiest, nor the most charismatic. But he bore something far heavier than his bronze armor: the crushing weight of inevitability. The oracle's words lingered over Sparta like a chilling shadow. Either the city would be destroyed by Persia, or one of its kings would fall. For a society that believed deeply in divine order, this was no metaphor. It was an undeniable, terrifying warning. And so, Leonidas prepared. He did not summon thousands. Religious law still bound Sparta during the Carnia. Instead, he carefully selected 300 Spartans, elite warriors, all seasoned veterans, each chosen with deliberate care. According to tradition, every one of them had a living son. The message was clear: their bloodline would not vanish with them. But Thermopylae would not be defended by Spartans alone. When Leonidas marched north, he was joined by contingents from across Greece: Corinthians, Arcadians, Phocians, Thebans, and most notably 700 Thespians. In total, the defending force numbered roughly 7,000 men. This was not a suicidal expedition. It was a strategically planned forward defense. Simultaneously, the Greek fleet sailed to Artemisium, a narrow strait where their triremes could maneuver without being overwhelmed by the superior Persian navy. This was not a lone, isolated stand. It was a coordinated resistance effort. Thermopylae was chosen with cold, calculating precision. The pass was incredibly narrow, so constricted in places that only a small number of men could engage at once. Mountains pressed in from one side, while the sea hemmed in the other. Here, Persian numerical superiority would dissolve, rendered impotent. Here, discipline would matter more than sheer size, and size was the one thing Persia possessed in terrifying abundance. When Xerxes finally arrived, the sight must have been staggering. Ancient accounts speak of hundreds of thousands. Modern historians suggest more conservative numbers, perhaps 100,000 to 250,000. But even these lower estimates utterly dwarfed the modest Greek force. Soldiers from across the vast empire stood beneath banners of countless cultures. Cavalry units shimmered in the sun, archers filled the ranks, and supply caravans stretched beyond sight. Xerxes expected immediate surrender. He waited 4 days, assuming the Greeks would scatter at the mere sight of his overwhelming army. Instead, he observed something peculiar: Spartans calmly exercising, meticulously combing their long hair, polishing their shields. In Persian eyes, such behavior seemed absurd. In Spartan culture, however, it was a sacred ritual, a solemn preparation for a warrior's ultimate fate. When Xerxes demanded that the Greeks lay down their weapons, Leonidas's legendary reply echoed through history: "Mol and Lab, come and get them." And so, the first clash became inevitable. But this was no reckless charge into glory. Leonidas understood something crucial. Thermopylae was not meant to be held forever. It was meant to buy time. Every day the Persians were delayed allowed Greek defenses to strengthen elsewhere. Every hour mattered. Behind the clash of bronze and iron stood meticulous calculation. Yet even the best calculation cannot account for everything, because the very mountains that protected them also concealed a path unseen. And somewhere in the shadows, a man named Ephialtes was about to step into history, not as a hero, but as something far more dangerous. What happens when the largest army on earth crashes against an unyielding wall of bronze? At dawn, on the 5th day of waiting, Xerxes' patience finally broke. For 4 agonizing days, he had watched the Greeks from his golden throne, strategically positioned to overlook the battlefield. He had expected fear, he had expected immediate surrender. Instead, he witnessed unwavering discipline, calm, and meticulous preparation. Now he would see blood. The first Persian assault moved forward in disciplined ranks. Archers, infantry, waves of soldiers accustomed to overwhelming resistance through sheer numbers. In open terrain, their mobility and flexibility were devastating. But Thermopylae was not open terrain. It was a suffocating choke point. As the Persian infantry surged into the narrow pass, they met an impenetrable wall. Greek hoplites locked their bronze shields together in a tight phalanx formation, spears extending forward like a dense forest of iron. Behind the first rank stood another and another, continuously reinforcing the line. The crushing weight of Persian numbers became utterly irrelevant. Only a few attackers could engage at once. The initial clash was brutal and brief. Persian soldiers fell in heaps before the disciplined thrusts of Greek spears. The narrowness of the pass prevented cavalry from maneuvering effectively. Archers found their arrows had limited effectiveness against the heavy Greek armor. What should have been a swift breakthrough became a grinding, horrific slaughter. Xerxes sent more troops. They fell too. Then came the legendary immortals. His elite guard, 10,000 strong, impeccably trained and hardened by countless battles. They advanced with an almost arrogant confidence, expecting to crush this stubborn resistance. Instead, they encountered the same impenetrable wall. Spartan and allied forces meticulously rotated positions. When one contingent tired, another fresh one stepped forward. The Greeks even feigned retreats, drawing the Persians into even tighter spaces before suddenly turning and striking with devastating force. From his elevated vantage point, Xerxes reportedly leapt from his throne more than once in utter frustration. The empire that had crushed kingdoms now found itself stalled by a mere few thousand men in a mountain corridor. For 2 full days, the defense held firm. Meanwhile, at Artemisium, the Greek fleet fought Persian naval forces in equally narrow waters. The battles at sea mirrored those on land, tight engagements designed to neutralize superior numbers. The war was unfolding on 2 synchronized fronts, bound together by a daring strategy. Thermopylae was working, but geography, like fate, cuts both ways. High above the pass, a narrow mountain path wound through terrain known only to locals. It was not wide, it was not obvious, but it existed. And Xerxes, desperate for a resolution, was about to learn of it. When Ephialtes approached the Persian camp and, in exchange for reward, revealed the hidden trail, the tactical balance shifted instantly and irrevocably. Xerxes wasted no time. Under cover of darkness, Persian forces marched through the treacherous mountain path to outflank the Greek position. At dawn, word reached Leonidas. They were surrounded. The defensive brilliance of Thermopylae had bought time, but not immunity. The very narrow pass that had neutralized Persian numbers could not stop encirclement. The moment of ultimate calculation had arrived, and Leonidas faced a decision that would transform history, not through survival, but through profound sacrifice. When you know death is inevitable, what do you choose to protect above all else? At first light, the grim reality became undeniable. Scouts brought word to Leonidas. Persian forces had successfully crossed the mountain path during the night. The hidden trail, betrayed by a local Greek named Ephialtes, had achieved what waves of soldiers could not. The defenders at Thermopylae were no longer facing an army in front of them. They were caught between two. The plan had always been delay, never immortality, never suicide. But now, the narrow pass that had been their greatest advantage was rapidly becoming an inescapable trap. Leonidas gathered his commanders. Some accounts suggest he dismissed the majority of the Greek forces, strategically preserving their strength for crucial battles yet to come. Others imply that certain contingents chose to withdraw on their own. What is clear is this: not everyone left. The Spartans remained, unwavering in their oath. So did 700 Thespians, men who were not compelled by Spartan law, not bound by prophecy, but who, by an act of conscious will, chose to stay. They could have retreated. They did not. A contingent of Thebans also remained, though history debates whether they stayed willingly or under pressure. In the end, they too stood firm in the narrowing circle of steel. This was no longer a defensive maneuver. It was a meticulously calculated act of self-sacrifice. Leonidas understood something critical. If the retreat became a panicked, disorganized collapse, Persia would sweep south uncontested, crushing all resistance. But if the final stand was fierce, if it was unforgettable, it would buy not only invaluable time but something far more powerful: unwavering resolve. When the Persians attacked from both sides, the battle transformed from a disciplined formation into an absolute maelstrom of chaos. Greek spears splintered from overuse, shields were dented and shattered. When weapons broke, swords replaced them. When swords failed, daggers emerged. Ancient accounts claim that, in the final, desperate moments, some fought with bare hands and teeth. Leonidas fell in the thick of the fighting. The struggle over his body became savage. Spartans pushed forward relentlessly to recover him, refusing to allow the Persian king the trophy of a captured corpse. The line collapsed inward, shrinking toward a small hill within the pass. There, surrounded and utterly outmatched, they made their final glorious stand. Arrows darkened the sky, bodies piled upon bodies. The defense did not break. It was simply overwhelmed and extinguished. By midday, Thermopylae was silent. Xerxes had won the pass. The Persian army could now march deeper into Greece. But victory felt expensive, dearly bought. Thousands of Persian soldiers lay dead in a place that should have fallen within hours. And already, the whisper of the stand was spreading. Stories of audacious defiance, of 300 Spartans and their allies who refused surrender, of men who chose death over submission. Thermopylae was a military defeat, certainly. But psychologically, something profound had shifted, because sometimes defeat resonates louder than victory, and what would follow would prove that this battle was never meant to be the end. What does freedom truly entail when your cherished city stands desolate, and your adversary treads its hallowed streets? After Thermopylae fell, nothing stood to impede Xerxes' relentless push into central Greece. The Persian army advanced south with renewed, terrifying momentum. The defensive line had been irrevocably broken. The narrow pass that had delayed them, purchased at such a terrible cost, was now behind them. And ahead lay one of the most symbolic prizes in the Greek world, Athens. But Athens was no longer waiting behind its walls. Themistocles had made a radical, profoundly prescient decision. He understood what many Athenians struggled to accept. Their city could not withstand the full force of the Persian land army. Stone walls would crumble, and sheer numbers would overwhelm. To preserve the people and, critically, the fleet, Athens had to be abandoned. Families, along with the city's future, were swiftly evacuated to the nearby island of Salamis and to the Peloponnese. The elderly, the sick, and the defiant few who refused to leave remained behind. The city itself stood largely empty. When Xerxes triumphantly entered Athens, he did not find submission. He found silence, and so he made an example of it. The Persian forces burned the city. Flames rose around the sacred Acropolis, temples were destroyed, and hallowed spaces were reduced to ash. Smoke coiled into the sky, a stark, unequivocal message to all of Greece. This is the devastating cost of resistance. For Xerxes, this was vindication. The defiant city that had once humiliated Persia at Marathon now lay in smoldering ruins. The empire had proven its raw power. But the war was far from over, because Athens had never intended to defend itself with walls. Its true strength awaited at sea. Just offshore, in the labyrinthine straits of Salamis, the Greek fleet gathered. Triremes, fast, agile warships powered by synchronized rows of oarsmen, formed a defensive line. Themistocles knew he could not possibly win in open waters against the massive Persian navy. But in confined spaces, the numerical advantage of the enemy would utterly evaporate. He needed Xerxes to attack where it would hurt him most. According to tradition, Themistocles sent a brilliant tactical deception to Xerxes, suggesting that the Greeks were hopelessly divided and preparing to flee. If the Persians struck quickly, he implied, they could crush them. It was a calculated gamble, and Xerxes, blinded by anticipated triumph, swallowed the bait. The Persian fleet surged into the narrow straits in overwhelming numbers, but the confined waters instantly turned that advantage into utter chaos. Ships collided, oars splintered, and maneuverability vanished. Greek triremes, agile and deadly, rammed enemy vessels with their bronze prows, breaking hulls and sending countless soldiers into the churning sea. From a hillside vantage point, Xerxes watched what he believed would be his final, glorious triumph. Instead, he witnessed an unimaginable catastrophe unfold before his eyes. The Persian navy, essential for supply lines and coastal dominance, was shattered. The psychological tide of the war turned completely. Thermopylae had delayed the empire. Salamis had delivered a crippling blow. And the following year, at the Battle of Plataea, Greek forces would decisively defeat the remaining Persian land army, finally ending the invasion. Athens had burned, yes, but Greece had not fallen. And now, the sacrifice at Thermopylae no longer seemed like a tragic defeat. It looked, instead, like the incandescent spark that ignited triumphant resistance. Why does a battle that ended in defeat often resonate more profoundly in human memory than countless victories? Thermopylae was not a tactical victory. It did not halt Xerxes' advance, nor did it directly spare Athens, nor conclude the war. And yet, more than 2,000 years later, its name continues to reverberate across history. Why? Part of the answer lies in the power of storytelling. The historian Herodotus, often called the father of history, chronicled the invasion in dramatic detail. He vividly described an army so vast that rivers ran dry when they crossed. He immortalized exchanges of defiant wit in the face of annihilation. "Come and take them," and the chilling retort to Persian arrows, "Then we shall fight in the shade." These pronouncements, whether entirely factual or brilliantly embellished, elevated history into an enduring legend. But beyond the legend lies something far deeper. Thermopylae was a pivotal moment when a coalition of independent city-states, often divided, often suspicious of one another, stood together against a centralized imperial power. It became an enduring symbol of autonomy, resisting domination, not because Greece was perfect or unified or morally superior, but because it chose unyielding defiance over submission. The sacrifice of the Spartans and their allies did not defeat Persia on that specific day, but it bought precious time. It galvanized a fractured people into unified resolve. It transmuted mere resistance into an indelible identity. After the war, Athens would rise into its golden age, a period of unparalleled flourishing. Democracy would deepen, philosophy would soar, drama would captivate, architecture would inspire, and political thought would innovate. The ripple effects of that survival would shape centuries of intellectual and political history. Had Xerxes crushed Greek resistance entirely, history might have unfolded in an entirely different, unknowable trajectory. But we do know this: Thermopylae proved that numerical supremacy is no guarantee of dominion. It proved that terrain can indeed dictate fate, that strategy can triumph over sheer scale, and perhaps most importantly, that sacrifice, forged in unwavering conviction, possesses an immortality that transcends empires. The Persians won the pass, yes, but they utterly failed to subdue the fundamental idea that small communities could chart their own destiny. Thermopylae became more than just a battlefield. It became a profound question posed to every generation. What are you willing to safeguard? And when faced with seemingly insurmountable odds, will you stand unbowed? The Battle of Thermopylae reminds us that history is not shaped solely by victories, but by moments of resolute will. It teaches us that courage is not the absence of terror, but the profound decision to act in its harrowing presence. It shows that unity, even in its most precarious form, can irrevocably alter the tide of events. And it proves that sacrifice, when imbued with deep conviction, can ignite movements and inspire generations far beyond its immediate, tangible consequences. Empires inevitably rise and fall, but ideas, particularly those defended with such immense courage and cost, truly endure. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this video and are passionate about this type of content, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming videos and can discover more fascinating stories. See you in the next video.